The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hi, I'm Farron Cousins sitting in for David Pakman this week, and this is the David Pakman Show. David is on vacation. I'll be sitting here with you for the next few days. There's a lot to talk about, so let's jump right into it. I think one of the biggest things, obviously, that's been happening over the course of the last few days, and no, it doesn't involve the president coloring a flag wrong or not lowering a flag to half-mast. It actually involves the president trying to interfere with the FBI and the DOJ. Starting late last week, Donald Trump tweeted out in response to Jeff Sessions saying he wasn't going to let his DOJ become politicized. Politics were not going to influence what he was doing. So the president gets on Twitter and he says the following here. He says, Jeff Sessions said he wouldn't allow politics to influence him only because he doesn't understand what is happening underneath his command position. Highly conflicted Bob Mueller and his gang of 17 angry Dems are having a field day as real corruption goes untouched. No collusion. The no collusion part at the end seemed a little odd. Didn't really apply to what he was saying, but sure, throw it in there, whatever. Then later on, he tweeted out that the FBI ignored hundreds of thousands of emails from Hillary Clinton. And he issued this ominous warning at the end of that tweet. It said, at some point, I may have to get involved. At some point, I may have to get involved. Let me tell you my little theory about everything that's going on right now with the president and his angry, incorrect tweets. First and foremost, he is laying the framework to fire Jeff Sessions. Now, it's not because he absolutely just hates Jeff Sessions. I mean, he's not happy that the guy recused himself from any of these investigations. But Jeff Sessions, for the most part, has been carrying water for this administration. You know, he put together Donald Trump's family separation policy for him. He has been a good little servant, except in this one particular area. So Donald Trump wants to get rid of him so that he can eventually replace him with somebody who will fire Robert Mueller or replace him or remove him or otherwise interfere with that investigation. That is the goal here. It's not that he's mad at Sessions. It's that he wants someone who's going to make this other investigation go away. So by coming out and telling us that the FBI dropped the ball on the Hillary Clinton investigation, or that there was collusion among the Democrats with foreign powers, he's trying to get his followers to buy into the idea that something's not right with the Democrats, but Jeff Sessions won't investigate them. Something has to be done. We're letting them get away with massive corruption. And that is the framework that he's creating right now. Now, we all know there's no basis in reality for any of this. Yeah, the FBI didn't look at thousands of emails, probably because they weren't relevant. We know that they investigated that. We know the Republicans have investigated Benghazi to the moon and back, and they couldn't come up with a single thing with which to charge Hillary Clinton for. All right, it's over. Let it go. It's done. I don't care what your opinion is of Hillary Clinton or any of that. The woman has been investigated probably more than any other sitting politician at this point. They couldn't get her on anything, so let it go. And no, it's not because we had corrupt investigative services. The FBI wasn't corrupted just because one dude happened to favor her who's now been fired. No. The only reason Trump is talking about this is because he needs a reason that will play well with his base to fire Jeff Sessions. And again, the firing of Sessions is only to get to Robert Mueller. Basically send a shot across the bow. Unfortunately for Donald Trump, it's really not going to play out the way he thinks it is. Because here's what's going to happen. Republicans have made it clear that they would not appoint or approve, confirm, a new attorney general before the midterms. So you're going to get an acting attorney general, most likely, Rod Rosenstein. Well, we all know Trump hates Rosenstein, so what's he going to do at that point? Fire Rosenstein as well? Just keep going through that entire line of succession until he finds the right man or woman willing to interfere with the Mueller investigation? That's not possible. It's going to make him look desperate. So at this point, his hands are really tied. Not to mention the fact that even though Jeff Sessions has lost some friends in the U.S. Senate, particularly Lindsey Graham, he still has buddies there. Keep in mind, this is a very tight-knit, close group of people. There's only 100 people at any given point out of the entire U.S. population of more than 330 million, only 100 serving as U.S. senators. Jeff Sessions was one of those people for, I believe, a little over 2 decades. Everybody. They're his friends. They still have lunch together on occasion. They're not going to take so kindly to Donald Trump firing him. They might. They've proven over the last few months that they are completely spineless, that they're not willing to stand up to the president when he does these awful things. But eventually there's going to come a breaking point for these folks. There has to. It's human nature. Something will happen. Something will come down from the president. One scandal will be too big for them to talk down, and they'll have to eventually turn on him. It may come before the midterms. Most likely it's going to come after the midterms. But either way, firing Jeff Sessions would be the catalyst that a few of these Republicans need to finally say enough is enough. And again, there is a little humor in it. As I mentioned before, Jeff Sessions has done every horrible thing that Donald Trump has wanted him to do, and then some. You know, his war on marijuana out there. That wasn't something Trump asked him to do. That's just his backwards 1940s political thinking at work. So the one good thing Jeff Sessions does, which is recuse himself from the investigation, that could actually end up getting him fired. The one time he wasn't a completely backwards politician, the one time he did the right thing, and now he may end up paying the price for it because Donald Trump is terrified of the Mueller investigation. But you know what else is terrifying the president right now? Not just the fact that, you know, his buddies are going to jail left and right. He is actually afraid of the investigation taking place in the Southern District of New York. Recently, Alan Dershowitz, in fact, it was this past Sunday, went on ABC's This Week, where he said that that investigation is the one that really should terrify Donald Trump. That is the one that actually has the power to take down this administration. And in case you haven't been following along at home, Dershowitz is no anti-Trumper. All right, this is a guy who every given opportunity is going to go on Fox News or any other cable news show and defend the president and try to say that he is above the law. In fact, in the ABC News interview, he also mentioned that Donald Trump is above the law. But here's the thing. If Dershowitz is out there telling us that Trump should be worried about this New York investigation and that it could end his administration, probably something we should be paying attention to, only for the fact that Dershowitz has done everything possible to defend the president. Here's what we know about these New York investigations. CFO Alan Weisselberg from the Trump Organization has been given immunity. David Pecker, National Enquirer, has been given immunity. These people know about payments. These people know what Donald Trump did. They have information about Michael Cohen. Cohen with his plea deal now, which we do not necessarily have all of the specifics of, but we do know that in some way, shape, or form, this man is cooperating. And as part of his cooperation, he also implicated Donald Trump in 2 felony offenses. But we also have the Trump charity, the Trump Foundation investigation happening right there, where they misused the charitable funds. They used them to try to influence the campaign, which is highly illegal. They used them to pay off some of their lawsuits, which is also illegal. You know, basically trying to do whatever they could to treat this Trump Foundation charitable fund as their personal piggy bank. And that is what they did. So you have that part of the investigation. And as Dershowitz correctly pointed out on this interview with Stephanopoulos, I believe it was, Trump can't pardon himself from any of that. There is nothing he can do. And as far as the Trump Foundation goes, the 4 people being looked at in that regard are Trump himself, Donnie Jr., Ivanka, and Eric. So that's the core Trump family right there. And there is nothing that the president could do should any one of them be indicted. Nothing. He cannot pardon them if they have committed state crimes. He can't interfere. He can't intervene. That's the end of it. And that's the message that Dershowitz was trying to send. And then Dershowitz also went on to say something that is completely untrue and I feel needs to be addressed. He said that the president has a lot of authority, with these federal offenses he may be facing, that he can somehow get out of them or that he can't be indicted or that he could pardon himself. This is all nonsense, okay? There is not a single word in any law written into the United States, in the Constitution, federal law, statutes, state law, local ordinances, nothing that says that a sitting president can't be indicted. That actually comes from a Justice Department memo that suggests the president can't be indicted. Now, last I checked, a memo from the DOJ isn't a law. That's just their opinion of the people who were working at the DOJ at the time. It would have to be tested in the courts to see if there is any constitutionality of it. We also know, obviously, Supreme Court made up about half and half right now. If Kavanaugh gets confirmed, it's going a solid Republican majority. But even then, testing the constitutional limits of the office of the presidency with regards to pardoning themselves or whether they can or cannot be indicted, I disagree firmly with Dershowitz on this. No one person in this country has ever been or will ever be above the law. And in order for a court to say that the president cannot be indicted, they would also have to tacitly be saying the president is above the law. And I don't care which side of the aisle you fall on, which, little letter is next to your voter registration ID. You can't tell me that anyone in this country, left, right, center, and everything in between, is above the law. That is a slippery slope from which we will never crawl our way out of again. The president, like everybody else in this country, can be indicted, can be arrested, and can be put in jail. There is nothing in any U.S. law that says otherwise. We're going to take a quick break, but if you want more, make sure you check out David's YouTube page. You can also find me on YouTube at youtube.com/theringoffire, and you can follow me on Twitter at FarronBalanced. We'll be right back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. I am Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire. I'm sitting in for David today. I'll be here with the next few days with you as well. Something over the weekend definitely bears talking about a little bit more than has already been fleshed out, I believe. And that is the fact that the DNC voted this past Saturday to strip superdelegates of their power. Kind of. I mean, did they really? When you read beyond the headlines that do tell us, oh, Democrats are taking superdelegate power away, they're really not, though. And that's what got me really riled up this past weekend. I saw these headlines, I saw the tweets, everybody talking about what a great move this is. And don't get me wrong, it is a phenomenal first step. And I do not at all want to undermine the hard work of the true progressives in the Democratic Party on that Unity Reform Commission who made this happen. They worked their tails off to get this done. Unfortunately, those in power at the DNC did not take it as far as was needed, right? Because here's what happens right now with the superdelegates under the new rules. They are not allowed to vote in a first-round ballot. That's it. That's it. That's the power they were stripped of. You just can't vote in a first round ballot. If it goes to a second round, guess what? Superdelegates are right back in there ready to sway an election one way or the other. So nothing changes. And there's actually still another caveat that if one nominee has already secured enough of the vote, they've already won enough delegates that they will win no matter what, then the superdelegates are allowed to go ahead and vote in that first round ballot, just I guess so they can feel special and powerful for a few minutes. None of this makes any sense. I mean, there is no way to slice the whole superdelegate thing to where it makes sense. These people who come in as superdelegates, the powerful elite, whoever they may be, they essentially get to vote twice, okay? The other delegates who are there also voted, obviously, most likely, in the primaries, but they only get to cast the other ballot based on what their state voted for. So it's not a second vote. They're just there representing to cast that delegate vote. The superdelegates, on the other hand, they can go to the polls on primary day, cast their ballot, and there goes one vote towards their candidate. Then they get to the convention, and they get to cast an independent vote that is equal to every other delegate in that room. How is that fair? How is that democratic? How is that going with the will of the people? And I know superdelegates most of the time will go with the will of the people, but there is no point to it. Either you want to go with the will of the people or you don't. You either go with whoever wins the popular vote of the primaries and wins the most delegates state by state, or you don't. That's the problem here. Superdelegates should not have a role within the Democratic Party or Republican Party, which they don't, but they shouldn't have a role in politics. They shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be a thing that we have to talk about. It shouldn't be something that the progressives within the Democratic Party are having to fight to have removed. There are so many battles that should be taking place right now, both within the party and outside of it. And yet we are having to have some of our best and brightest people go to the DNC and try to convince them to actually strip superdelegates of their power. We still have a party that refuses to add a ban on fracking to their platform. They voted that down back in 2016. And yet here we are, rather than talking policy, rather than coming up with a party platform that works for the party, that has good, solid messaging that everybody wants to hear, instead of doing that, we're having fights over superdelegates still. That's not productive. And again, I am not in any way trying to undermine the hard work of people who made this happen. It was a fight that needed to happen, and it had to happen. Unfortunately, it's not a fight that if the Democratic Party had done what was right, we would have even had to have had in the first place. We should be talking policy right now. We should be meeting with the party leaders, meeting with the people running for office in this year's midterms, and coming up with a strategy. But instead, we have to go back and rehash these wounds from 2016 because we as a party, the Democrats, just kind of seem incapable of any kind of solid reflection on themselves. And that can hurt them. Now, there's progress being made. Obviously, stripping superdelegates of some of their power, again, great positive step. But it is a baby step, okay? This is not a be-all, end-all for superdelegates. They still have power, and any power that they hold is too much power. But, at least for the time being, they have shown, the party elite, the establishment, the leadership, have shown that they're willing to give some concessions. So, if they're willing to give those concessions, let's keep going. And they are. I mean, the people in the Unity Commission are absolutely pushing forward. They're getting things done. This was just the first battle they had to wage, but they are not done. But there's another flip side of this that I think needs to be talked about. I think right now the Democrats understand that we really are looking at a blue wave this coming November in the midterms. But that blue wave cannot happen if you do not, work on the reunification of the Democratic Party. The establishment, the progressives, the still with her versus the Bernie bros, all of that. And I don't use any of those as derogatory terms. You believe what you believe. You support who you support. But all of those people together have to push the Democrats into office this November. And in order to do that, the DNC has to show that they are making positive steps to be more inclusive, to not let the elite and the establishment have all the power, because you got to get the progressives back in there. Now, that isn't to say that once they do that, okay, every Democrat deserves your vote. The Democrats still have to earn it. And they earn it by coming up with a platform that addresses the real issues that American citizens care about. Student loan debt relief, predatory lenders, the gap between the haves and the have-nots, Medicare for all, 70% of support for that across the board here. Those are the things they have to talk about. And when we have to get sidetracked to fight over stupid things like superdelegates who shouldn't have any power to begin with, that is time that is taken away from issues that the American public actually wants to hear about. I am proud of the party and the people who fought diligently to strip superdelegates of some of their powers. That fight's not over, but right now we're going to hold that fight for another day. What's left right now is to fight for a better party platform that is a better reflection of what the American public wants to see from their politicians. And there's another, obviously, if we're talking about the midterms or talking about elections, we have to talk about the Republicans, right? Because they're the ones who stand to lose a lot of power. Well, earlier this week, Axios got their hands on a leaked document from a Republican member of Congress that pretty much laid out everything that the Republican Party is essentially covering for Donald Trump on right now. They came out with this list of things that they're worried Democrats are going to investigate if they take back power in the House or Senate or both. Here's the list. I got to read this here. The Trump family businesses and whether they comply with the Constitution's Emoluments Clause. Trump's dealings with Russia. The payment to Stormy Daniels, James Comey's firing, Trump's firing of U.S. attorneys, Trump's proposed transgender ban for the military, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin's business dealings, White House staff's personal email use, Cabinet Secretary travel, office expenses, and other misused perks, discussion of classified information at Mar-a-Lago, Kushner's ethics law compliance, dismissal of members of the EPA Board of Scientific Counselors, travel ban, family separation policy, hurricane response to Puerto Rico, election security and hacking, White House security clearances. Those are just some of the issues that the GOP laid out in their super secret we can't lose document that they think Democrats are going to start investigating if they take back over after the midterms. But what it also means is that they know every single one of these things on this list I just read to you is a big, big problem for the administration. And they know that there's obviously something worthwhile in all of those things to begin investigating. Personally, as much as I dislike this entire administration, I think the very first thing needs to be investigated would be the hurricane response in Puerto Rico. That island is still not put back together. You still have people living under those blue roof FEMA tarps. You still have people without electricity. The government still won't tell us the official death toll of Hurricane Maria. They don't have access to clean water. We only found out a week or two ago that they left donated supplies in a tractor trailer sitting in a parking lot to rot. Baby food, baby formula, things that we needed down there. People donated here from the States and sent down to the island. And we just left it. Government left it. FEMA was in charge of dispersing it, but when they pulled out of the island, or excuse me, the National Guard, when they pulled out, they said, we'll just leave this thing here. They'll know what to do. Here's your stuff, come and get it. Except nobody even bothered to say that much. So it rotted. So yeah, I think the response to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico would be a phenomenal place to start in terms of investigations. People died in that one, okay? But these other ones here, the Comey firing, yeah, okay. That's likely obstruction based on what we know so far. Maybe not. It's pointing that way. But the bottom line is that Republicans understand that every single one of these could be a campaign issue. That's why they were circulating this document. That's why they wanted to raise awareness amongst members of their party so that they knew what they were up against. The Democrats are playing it smart, though. They're not running on impeachment. They're not running on investigations that are going to be launched the first day. No, they are, to their credit, out there talking about issues. They've learned, it appears at this point, from the mistakes of 2014 and 2016. If you want to beat these folks, you've got to talk about the issues. We have to take another quick break. You're watching The David Pakman Show. We'll be right back.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to The David Pakman Show. I'm Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David Pakman today. A lot of the news recently, obviously, has been focusing on crazy things Donald Trump is doing. It's been focusing on John McCain. We had another school shooting, or not school shooting, excuse me, mass shooting recently. But there is another major story that too few have spoken about recently. And to their credit, recently, CNN actually did mention it. And that is the number of children being murdered in Yemen at the hands of essentially U.S. defense contractors. The weapons, the bombs, the missiles that are killing these kids may be fired by countries like Saudi Arabia, but they're being manufactured right here in the United States. Boeing, Lockheed, those groups are making these weapons that are killing children. We've all seen the reports. 3 weeks ago, 44 children killed on a school bus. The missile, bomb, whatever you want to call it, hit the school bus, killed 44 children. Do you know what those children were doing on the bus? They were on their way back from a field trip. It was a celebratory field trip because they had just finished their summer classes. So they were out doing something nice for the day. They had finished summer education and they were celebrating. They were on their way back from that celebration. And they were killed by weapons made right here in the United States by United States defense contractors, sold to countries like Saudi Arabia, who just killed them. Just fired the missile, didn't care where it went. Didn't care who got hit. Didn't care who died. And we know they didn't care. Because last week, and this is the one that CNN finally spoke up against and mentioned on the air, 26 children and 4 women were killed. Again, by weapons made here in the United States while fleeing violence. They were trying to leave. They were running for their lives. And we blew them up. Now, currently, the United States is not officially at war. I mean, we have not signed any declaration of war against any particular nation. We do have our, alleged war on terror happening right now. But that is no excuse for any of this. The only people who are benefiting in any way from these bombings are U.S. defense contractors. They make and market and sell death and destruction. That is what these products are designed to do. And we have no problem as a country allowing them to operate, allowing them to build these things, to sell them to our alleged allies, countries like Saudi Arabia, one of the worst human rights abusers on the planet. But sure, they're one of our closest allies. But if any other country abuses human rights in any way, we're one of the first people there to tell them that they're horrible people and that they have to stop or else we're going to do something. But not Saudi Arabia. No, we let them get away with anything. And that is one of the reasons why this story is so disgusting. They are indiscriminately bombing. They are killing school children, young children, toddlers, women, people fleeing the violence. There is no excuse for that whatsoever. You can't say, oops, you missed. We were trying to hit a bad guy over here, but we ended up launching it at the school bus. No, I don't buy that. And we have a very real problem here. And the problem goes beyond just the fact that we still consider Saudi Arabia to be a friendly country. The problem is that we allow these weapons manufacturers here in the U.S. to dictate who our friends are. You know, CNN, again, I have to bring them up because it's so weird that they actually talked about this story and how horrible it was. Because CNN, more so than any other network, is one of the first ones to promote any kind of conflict. You see commercials on those networks, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. You see commercials for Boeing and Lockheed. Why? Why are they advertising their services on a cable news network? Are you, average viewer and consumer, going to go out and buy a missile? No. But you got to control the messaging. And you control the messaging by becoming a powerful advertiser on that network. Yeah, they know you're not going to go buy an F-15 fighter jet, but as long as they pay a few $1 million to a CNN or a Fox or an MSNBC to just have their ads running on there, that gives them power with the network. So that is why it was so shocking and admirable, finally for once, for CNN to finally bring up this atrocity that's happening in Yemen. To finally talk about it and say, this is too much, this is bad. Children, any death is bad. Any death is bad. Don't get me wrong on that. But the fact that they are actually actively, apparently, targeting children, that is a war crime. And Saudi Arabia doesn't seem to have a problem committing them. And unfortunately, here in the United States, we don't have a problem with not calling them out on it either. But you know what? Here in the United States, you don't have to leave. You don't have to go to another country to watch children get murdered just living their daily lives. It happens here almost every day. You know, this past Sunday, another mass shooting. And a few days before that, a really disgusting story came out about Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education. A few months ago, the U.S. Department of Education came up with a plan. They wanted to allocate $50 million to public schools across the country to ramp up security, you know, to beef things up, to prevent the next atrocity from happening in our schools. And folks at the Department of Education also stipulated as part of that $50 million that none of it could be used to buy guns for teachers. Well, time ticks on, as it always does. And Betsy DeVos is now working to kind of get around that loophole in order to make new grants available out of that money so that teachers can go buy a gun to have in their classroom. And this is a gun that they would be given a grant for by the United States government. We, the taxpayers, would be paying for this teacher to have a gun in their classroom so they can protect themselves and the entire school, I guess, the next time somebody comes in and wants to shoot them up. Police officers across the country, teachers across the country, administrators across the country are telling us and have told us every time, this is a stupid idea. my wife, I've mentioned this, actually guest hosting this show before. My wife is an educator. She's a special education teacher. A few weeks ago, before they went back to school to start this new school year, they had to go through active shooter drills. One of the things, in fact, her school was actually the one that everyone in the county had to come to do this there. Anyway, one of the things that the teachers at this school were told was that if they go on a lockdown because there's an active shooter, they're instructed they have to close your door, lock it, and barricade it, and then get the students in the class into a corner and protect them as best they can. But this is the sick part that's going to make you really cringe here. If any students are left in the hallway, if they start banging on your door, begging to be let in, you can't open your door. There's a violation of policy now. You can't let that child begging for their life into your classroom once you have locked that door in an active shooter drill. How terrifying is that? That's our policy. That is the policy. You have to sit there as an educator and hope that that kid banging on your door isn't the next one to get shot. But that's what we're now telling them. Get in a room, and if you're not in there in the next few seconds, oh well, maybe you should hope that your teacher has a gun on you. And let's talk about the other side of this too, because this is a side I know all too well. Betsy DeVos, again, wants to take money out of this $50 million fund to let teachers buy guns. Teachers can't afford supplies for their rooms. Why aren't you doing anything about that, Betsy? Why aren't you doing anything about that, state governments across the country? The average school teacher here in the United States teaching a public school will spend between $1,200 and $1,500 out of their own pockets every year to buy supplies for their classroom. And I'm not talking about fun stuff, like having a candy jar for kids in elementary school. I'm talking about basic necessity: glue, pens, pencils, paper, tissues, things that their classroom needs in order to operate. Many teachers end up buying their own computers out of their pockets. Oh, and here's the kicker. They just reduced how much teachers can write off on their taxes when they have to spend their own meager salaries on their own supplies. It was cut in half by the recent Republican tax cut plan. So, as I've mentioned, my wife is a teacher. She spends roughly $150 to $200 per month out of her own pocket to buy things for her classroom just so that she can teach. So we can't let teachers get supplies. We don't have any money for that as a country. But damn it, if you want a gun, we're going to get you one. We're going to make sure we get that money available to you, because God forbid groups like the NRA and the gun industry go without profit. That's what it always comes back to. Everything. Look, if there was some kind of nonprofit group making guns, I can promise you this proposal by Betsy DeVos wouldn't even be on the table. But because it benefits a private industry that gives tons of money to her party, she is absolutely going to bend over backwards, find any loophole possible to make these grants available to teachers to use our tax dollars to put a gun in your kid's classroom. How easy would it be, again, you know, if we're talking about a high schooler, how easy would it be for a larger high school student to overpower a teacher and take that gun away? What happens if the teacher doesn't secure it properly? And suddenly, you create the next mass shooter by giving them the opportunity. More guns equals more death. Any chart you look at where it says the number of guns and the number of deaths, there will always be a correlation. They will always rise together. That's how it goes. And yet here we have the Secretary of Education attempting to actually make that our policy, and make it our policy on the taxpayer's dime. I don't want a penny of my tax dollars going towards any kind of weapon for anyone. Not missiles for Saudi Arabia, not guns for teachers. Maybe that's just me, but I think there's a lot of people in this country who feel the same way. We need to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more on the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hi, I'm Farron Cousins from Ring of Fire, sitting in for David Pakman. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. A very interesting development happened at the end of last week. News reports came out that oil companies are now begging the federal government for money in order to protect them from the effects of climate change. These same oil companies, by the way, who are in court all over the country arguing that they shouldn't be held liable for the damages that are being caused by climate change that they've known about for decades, just didn't tell anybody, even hid it from their own shareholders. But now, those down in Texas are begging the federal government to come in with billions of dollars, $12 billion they want from the federal government to help protect their oil refining facilities down there in Texas from climate change. So why now? Well, as you'll recall, last year we had Hurricane Harvey. It devastated the city of Houston, Texas. And Houston obviously is a very big oil refining city, along with all the outliers. And it was also horribly flooded. Flood of the century, they said. And then we saw more floods like that just in the same year. But nonetheless, chemicals, toxins, toxic waste from these refineries and other chemical plants in the area were all leaked into that water, contaminated the groundwater, contaminated the Gulf of Mexico when they receded into there. All in all, really bad. The oil refineries were partly responsible for that, along with the chemical plants. But they understood something that most of the media wasn't really talking about, and that is that this massive storm and the massive flood was the result. It's what we get with climate change. That's what happens. And they want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. They don't want to be liable for when the next time a flood comes and all their toxic chemicals go out into people's waterways and the drinking water and their homes and the soil. So they want the government to come in with $12 billion to create massive seawalls to help work on water redirection plans to protect their refineries. But it's not just about refineries, obviously, or liabilities. It's they don't want their operations to be interrupted at all. They still want to be able to refine that oil, get it out there, so we put it in our cars, we use it to make plastic, whatever it is we need to do. They want to keep supplying that oil, so we keep burning it. They just don't want to pay for any of the problems that it causes when we do that. And again, I can't stress this enough. They're arguing in courts all across this country. In fact, they've had, I think, 3 major legal victories in just the last few weeks, where cities and states are suing oil companies for the cost of climate change that those cities are having to deal with. Rising sea levels, increased floods, things like that. The cities incur the cost, which means taxpayers, and they just want the oil companies to come in and pay their fair share. They did help create this problem, but courts across the country are actually throwing those suits out at the request of the oil industry. Why? Because from a strict liability standpoint, it is difficult to say that Exxon is responsible for X amount of pollution, and that X amount of pollution is responsible for Y amount of climate change. Almost impossible to really come up with those particular equations. Therefore, liability is impossible to determine, and that's why these lawsuits are getting thrown out. It's sad, it's unfortunate, but these oil companies know. They know what they've been doing for decades. They know they've been covering it up for decades. And now they want to take $12 billion from our already cash-strapped government to protect their facilities. They also say that, oh, this protects the nearby communities as well because the seawall won't let them get flooded. People need to be protected from the effects of climate change. But here's the thing. When your industry is already getting subsidized to the tune of between $4 and $7 billion every year from the federal government, you don't really deserve any other handouts. Hell, you don't even deserve those handouts to begin with, but you're still getting them. So if you want money from the federal government that's coming from the taxpayers, if you want that money to mitigate the effects of climate change, then you can take it out of those subsidies that you get every year. Or, and this is just crazy talk, the fact that you're a 20 or $30 billion per year in profit oil company, maybe you could just take like half of that for 1 year, and that's more than enough to cover the cost of that. There you go. I just solved your problem. More importantly, you want to solve the problem, stop doing what you're doing. Stop producing fossil fuels and instead redirect your company to become a renewable energy company. Instead of refining oil, start building solar panels. Instead of drilling for oil, start making windmill turbines. Redirect your employees to focus on a new area, retrain them, rebrand your entire business, become the leader in that industry. But you won't, because nobody at any of these companies has any kind of forward thinking. They all want to look backwards. They all want to say, there's still a little bit of oil. Oh, there's still a little bit of coal over here in this mountain, even though the coal industry is dying. I think I can scrape some off the top if you give me a toothpick or something. That's the point we're at, folks. They are going to do everything possible until the very last ounce of fossil fuel on this continent is extracted and burned. And then, once there is nothing left to refine, once there is nothing left to burn, they'll finally look at it and say, okay, let's get started on making some solar panels then. And by then it'll be too late. You'll already have other companies that came in and started making them, and they've cornered the market. Now, I'm no economist here, but it seems to me that any one of these massive oil companies that is sitting on billions and billions of dollars in the bank, if they truly want to secure their business's long-term future, it would be to switch over to renewables right now. Right now. The technology exists. And with the scientists you have working for you, with the resources that you have, I'm sure you could make that technology even better. You could become the most profitable company on the planet, and you could be protecting the planet at the same time. But we do not have enough forward-thinking individuals in any of the fossil fuel industries to actually put that idea into practice. Instead, they would rather go down with the ship, extract the last little bit of fossil fuel from the planet that they can, and then at that point, maybe have a strategy meeting about how to move forward. And while we're on the subject of the environment, let's talk about the EPA, right? We know, based on the report that the EPA put out, I guess, a week and a half ago, that their new plan that's supposed to replace the Obama administration's Clean Power Rule, their plan is actually going to kill as many as 1,400 American citizens every single year. The EPA admitted that. They admitted that their own plan that is going to kind of roll back some of the regulations on the coal industry and coal-fired power plants, it's going to kill 1,400 people a year. At most, and maybe as few as 500, right? But really, as the EPA says, isn't that a small price to pay so that these coal companies don't have to spend money to work on things like carbon capture? They don't have to worry about where to dump their toxic coal ash. They can just dump it in those ponds that then go onto poison rivers and aquifers and everything it touches. That's what they're telling us. They're telling us that this cost 1,400 possible American lives lost each year, most of which are due to the increased particulates that will be going into the atmosphere. It's worth it, because we don't want the dying coal industry to have to pay a few more dollars each year to clean up their messes. No, so let's let them pollute the air and the water and the land and the people, because 1,400 deaths a year is totally cool with this incarnation of the EPA. The Environmental Protection Agency, as it stands right now, does not work for the public health. It does not work for environmental health. It 100% works for corporations. That's it. That is who this EPA, now under the at least temporary direction of Andrew Wheeler, the former coal lobbyist, they are working for corporations. They did the same thing under Scott Pruitt. The only reason Pruitt ended up leaving office is because his scandalous history got a little too much for him to overcome. He wasn't even fired. He just chose to resign because he couldn't even go have a meal in peace. But this administration, this EPA, I mean, heck, the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, the Department of Commerce, every piece of this administration is 100% working for the benefit of major corporations. And in the case of the EPA, it's the fossil fuel industry. It's the chemical industries. Your Dow DuPonts, your Bayer Monsantos, out there poisoning everything that we hold dear. Our bodies, our property, the water, everything. And the EPA isn't doing a thing about it. Enforcement actions at the EPA since Donald Trump took office have fallen by 94%. 94%. The EPA doesn't care. They don't care if their own policies are going to poison you. They don't care if their policies are going to send you to an early grave. Maybe you'll be lucky enough to where you're not one of the 1,400 people that dies in the next year. But maybe they get you the next one or the one after that. And if they don't kill you, they also admit that it's going to increase the instances of asthma and chronic bronchitis, as well as other upper respiratory diseases. So they may not put you in the grave, but they're going to make it to where you have trouble breathing for the rest of your life. And again, they're only doing it so that the coal industry doesn't have to spend more money to have a slightly cleaner operation. The only solution, this is it, this is the only thing we can do, is get off fossil fuels. At a time when every other developed country in the world is trying to switch to renewable energy, doing their best, trying to cut back fossil fuel, cut out coal completely, we're doubling down on it. We're deregulating them. Donald Trump is out there promising that their coal jobs are coming back, even when the coal miners come and do interviews afterwards and say, yeah, our jobs aren't coming back. We know that. Why is he lying to us? That actually happened in the last week. But nonetheless, he's out there making these lofty promises that coal somehow is going to come back. Perhaps in the same way that this madman in Oval Office actually is bringing back asbestos into our daily lives. Unfortunately, that's a topic for another day. And that is all the time we have for today. I appreciate David letting me sit in today. I will be back tomorrow. David will still be on vacation. You can find me on Twitter at Farron Balanced, FARRONBALANCED. That also happens to be how you can find me on both Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.